Welcome back to episode 90 of the Podcana podcast. This week we have a very, very special guest replacing Brendan and Moyen. It's just me and Zach this week. But yeah, we've got Zach Bivens, the future world champion, as I like to call him. I'm really grateful to have Zach on the podcast. This week we're going to be discussing some kind of Set 7 brews. We're also going to be discussing the Set 8 packaging that was revealed literally just today. And also we're going to be diving into Zach's, kind of testing routine, some kind of like work-life balance, which sounds weird, but, the importance of being able to balance out testing and also just do other stuff in your life. But yeah, Zach, welcome to the podcast. It's been a wild ride to see your journey throughout Lorcana. I mean, I remember interacting with you very, very early on, back in like Set 1, Set 2, and I had the opportunity to meet you in Bologna, which was really, really cool. You went out for dinner with myself and my fiance. Yeah. That was awesome. But do you want to just introduce yourself briefly to anyone who may not know you?
Sure. So thanks for having me on. It was awesome having dinner with you guys. That was so much fun, especially because I knew nothing about Italy. I didn't speak the language there. So it was nice to see some familiar faces. But anyways, yeah, name's Zach Bivens, been in Lorcana since day one. I've been in card games since day one of my life, basically. I've been playing them Pokemon in second grade. Like, that's where I started. Played Pokemon competitively, traveled the world with that, world championships, all that stuff for there. And then just other card games throughout my life too. But kind of brought me here to Lorcana. I was kind of done with the other card games, and it came in the perfect time, the Lorcana release. And it's just been a fantastic game. So it's been really successful for me. So hopefully it keeps going that way. But yeah.
Hell yeah, man. Yeah, like I remember seeing you crushing it back in like Set 1, Set 2 days. And it's funny, we're always talking about on this podcast, like I don't know, I feel like such a boomer or something, where I keep like being so nostalgic about like, oh, back in my Set 1 day. And I also I've seen you making tweets, right, about like, seeing some of the Japanese and Chinese players. Obviously that's kind of the Set 1, Set 2 meta they're in now. And we're all like, oh bro, they're discovering Popsicle. It's like, it's about to get crazy. Yeah.
Dude, yeah. I saw someone post about winning a tournament with the Hercules deck in Set 2. And I'm like, whoa, that literally felt like an entire lifetime ago. Like, honestly, looking back at it, it feels like such a long time ago.
For sure, yeah. The nostalgia is like crazy already, and we're like, we're just over a year. But yeah, I guess we're gonna jump into the Spilled Ink section really quickly before we kind of cover the other topics. So for those of you who don't know, the Spilled Ink section is our listener question section. If you guys want to have your question read out on next week's episode of the podcast, be sure to leave a comment down below. The first one is from Eli. They say, no question, just shout out to Kawa and your growth hosting skills. During that Discord event with the other content creators and devs, it felt like you carried conversations and had good questions. Not trying to rag on the other content creators too hard, but Kawa's hosting skills are growing and growing with every episode. Podcana is such a blast, mixed with good insight and comedy. Keep it up. Yeah, I wanted to just mention this comment because this was like really nice to wake up to one morning. I remember I uploaded the podcast and, honestly, you don't get too many messages like this. Obviously, we get a lot of support, and I really do appreciate everybody. But this one just felt really, really nice because we try so hard in many different aspects, right? We've got Moyen, who is a true competitive player. We've got Brendan on the casting side, and I'm kind of trying to do a little bit of everything. So I really do appreciate the support that all of you guys have shown, and yeah, being able to be part of that Discord event, speaking to the devs, was like, I'm truly grateful to Ravensburger for being able to do that, and I hope they keep that up. I think there was a period kind of after Set 3 where there wasn't too many of those interactions between like the dev team and the art team with the actual like content creators. I think we get a lot of interesting discussions from those, so I really hope that they keep them up and do more of those in the future for sure. Yeah, did you find it? I don't know if you actually watched it, Zach, but the dev talk insightful at all? I thought it was really, really cool.
I mean, I have to be honest. I haven't watched any of the Lorecast, anything like that. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, sure no worries. Yeah. The next one is from Roro Bear. They say, do you think it's worth running the glass slipper / Cinderella combo without ever intending to play the slipper? You can put the slipper in your discard with effects like Dock or the new Steel Mulan 1-drop. Then you hope to draw Cinderella naturally. This is an interesting question because like the biggest comparison I have to this is like, instead of, for example, playing your Lilo going to the discard, you just discard your Lilo from hand and you can kind of instantly play it. So you're kind of like skipping a step. But the problem with this, in my opinion, is because Glass Slipper reads, you can only have 2 copies within your deck.
Mm-hmm.
And because you can only have 2 copies in your deck, to say, oh, I'll draw this naturally, it's going to be harder to draw than the rest of the cards in your deck. So I think you can't really have this type of combo where you hope to just have the Slipper in your hand and then discard it and then play the Cinderella to do the kind of lore gain without having like maybe a tutor for the item. That's kind of my initial thoughts, but yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Do you remember what Glass Slipper does, Zach? Because I also have to refresh my memory.
Yeah, I did have to. I just went and looked at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree with what you're saying. Only having 2 of them in your deck definitely limits that. I think the even more problem with it is that it's uninkable. Like, if I'm playing a tech in my deck that I'm not even trying to play, I'm only trying to get in the discard. Like, it's a brick just being uninkable, and then like very situational. So I think the uninkable, well, I wouldn't rule that completely out. It's probably not going to happen because of that.
For sure, yeah. And it's like, it seems like a super kind of OTK thing to do, super combo style. I mean, we are seeing more tutors within the game. I mean, like the Glass Slipper being a tutor itself to find a princess character, right? So, yeah, it's interesting, but I personally don't think we're quite there yet. The next one is from Luca. They say, can you guys talk more about the new Green Steel Pete? I know that Green Steel didn't receive much love since Diablo, but I think that the Pete is actually a pretty good addition, as it's a natural shift for a core card, the 3-cost Pete, which has great stats. It's hard to remove, and it's a great counter to Steel Song overall, which they think is not a great matchup. Also, it gives us good reason to play Smee, which is a fantastic 2-drop, and would give more consistency to the deck. So, yeah, this new Green Steel Pete, I actually did a little bit of testing this weekend with the card, and we'll be getting into a Green Steel deck later on in the episode for some Set 7 deck brews. But yeah, I tested this in kind of like your standard Green Steel deck. I personally haven't been a big fan of Morph within Green Steel decks previously, because it's kind of only been the B shift line, maybe a weird Diablo shift line, and then maybe you're encouraged to play the Big Tink if you have Morph in your deck. I'm not really a fan if it's just the Beast and the Diablo with the Morph. So I actually put Morph back in the deck. I felt, okay, with Pete, it's kind of like another Floodborn target. Maybe putting like even 2-3 Morph in the deck makes it a little bit better. And my testing with the card was, I mean, like Lucas said, against a deck like Steel Song, it is pretty good. Even against a deck like this kind of low to the ground, these Tempo Blue Steel decks we've seen with this, this basically 1-cost Bell that will sing like a Strength or a Storm Rage on. It's been pretty decent against those, but again, I just tested it against like Red Blue, and it felt like fine. I guess like a Maui just dies to it. Maui has to challenge into it. But usually they're just kind of hard casting their songs and stuff like that. So Green Steel in general for me, I'm actually a much bigger fan of Zan's recent lists, which have like the Merfolk in it that like are a little bit more aggressive. And you can still do like your Dock and Muses bounce type of stuff. I think that's kind of a little bit more core to the deck than some of the shift lines. But again, like adding cards like the Green Steel P into the deck, I do think it opens up the opportunity to bring Morph back into the deck. But what are your thoughts on the card, Zach? Have you done any testing so far, or just general thoughts?
Yeah, I haven't really had much time to test yet. Just looking at the card, like, it's not a bad card by any means. It's got good stats, quest for 2. It can shift. That's what makes it actually playable. If it couldn't shift, it wouldn't be. Yeah, I think it's good, like you said, against Steel Song, but I'm kind of worried about Steel Song even being in the format right now.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, it's great against Steel Song, but how much Steel Song are you going to see? So I think it's a solid card with plenty of potential, but I don't think it's like amazing or anything. Just my initial impressions of it.
Yeah, it's actually something I was going to talk to you about later in the episode. It was like just general opinions of Steel Song, because like we're very much seeing a shift away from like the traditional Steel Song into these more the Candio Diggy Diggy Hole deck, and kind of these curve decks, as I like to call them, where you're literally going like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But it's interesting as well, because then maybe some people think that Steel Song can sneak back into the meta. I personally don't think so right now, but I'll be happy to be kind of proved wrong. Speaking about Steel Song, the next comment is from Solo Falcon. They say, Prince Naveen gets around the new Gantu's enter the battlefield effect since he doesn't exert to play the song. So that's true. Yeah, there's some cool stuff obviously you can still do with Naveen. I think that Gantu's been pretty interesting. I think most people look at the Gantu and they're like, oh, again, it's kind of a direct song counter, but I like the Gantu because it's one of the first cards we've seen in Lorcana which just straight up makes your opponent's cards cost more. And from my experience with other card games, that's usually a pretty good effect. Especially because like you drop that down, your whole opponent's game plan of what they were planning to do may have to change now. You know, it's like any cards that make cards cost more are usually weaker against like ramp decks that want to play just like big bombs, because usually there's enough kind of ink or resources to play your cards. But against decks that want to play like 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops, obviously in this case of the Gantu, it's just action, so it's not like character cards. But you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Like you print a card that's like, oh, all of your opponent's cards even cost like 1 more for their next turn. That card, like, depending on the stats and stuff, could be quite disruptive if your opponent isn't kind of anticipating it. So yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this type of effect, I guess, within card games. Like, have you played any other card games that have had a similar type of effect, or you've seen it as kind of a disrupting tool?
Yeah, I think I love the existence of the Gantu. I think it's very useful. It's kind of tough. It doesn't really, like, his stats are bad. He's uninkable. Yeah. But I think that he's definitely good at it. Like that he exists. I'm definitely going to try him out. And he's another reason why Still Song is kind of pushed out a little bit. For sure. So yeah, I like the card. Excited to try it out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then the last comment we have is from Jo. They say, I'm pretty high on the new Bagheera card. It's a free grab your swords threat. The steel mats are always being calculated and throwing 2 damage on all opposing characters on the opponent's turn. Just opens up so many options on your next turn for further steel pings. Maybe it proves to not be as effective because your opponent gets to choose when it goes off. And in some board states, Chen Po is basically just deal 4 damage to all opposing characters in order to banish him. We'll definitely be testing him though. Yeah, I think I've seen the Bagheera be one of the more talked about legendaries, to be honest. Like, grab your swords on the body is nothing to shy away from, but it's a weird card. It's like a card I've kind of been struggling to evaluate, because I look at it at times and say, oh, this could be really good, and then other times I'm like, oh, maybe it's like really not as good as I was thinking. And I think the commenter hit the point perfectly, where your opponent can kind of control when it goes off, but if you have enough support in your deck with like multiple pings, or like, it's more beneficial for you that way, maybe the card's okay. But I mean, since I'm sure you've looked at the card, maybe you've seen something that I haven't seen, but like, do you think it's playable at least? Do you think it's like...
Yeah, I think it's very playable. It certainly has potential. I mean, it's bodyguard. It has 4 strength, which matters a lot, instead of like 3 or 2 or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it certainly has potential. A very powerful effect. But yeah, like you said, your opponent kind of controls it, and if you pay 5 for this and it dies without getting the value, like, that's really bad. So I think it definitely has potential. It's not unplayable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. But yeah, that was the Spilding section. Again, if you guys want to have your questions read out on next week's episode of the podcast, be sure to leave a comment down below. So yeah, now we're going to just quickly jump into, looking at the Set 8 packaging, Reign of Jafar. So yeah, Reign of Jafar, for those of you who don't know, releases on June 6th, but there's going to be a pre-release on May 30th, which is it's kind of a big deal in my opinion, because we haven't really had a kind of traditional pre-release in Disney Lorcana, compared to other card games. Usually the quote-unquote pre-release has been just like the hobby store. Hobby store is getting the product early, and then 2 weeks after that it goes to mass retail. So it's kind of cool that we have this pre-release, because players who really want to get in early, they've also confirmed, like, you can buy boosters, you can buy product on May 30th. You don't have to wait for June 6th. The like June 6th release is going to be kind of the mass retail then after. So pretty cool to see them doing this, and yeah, love the art of Reign of Jafar, and yeah, excited to see what it's going to bring. I really hope it brings more support for the illusions, because so far we saw that like Steel Amethyst Jafar that like has illusions be bounced back to your hand when they're banished, but there's like only 3 illusions being printed this set. So I'm very much anticipating there's gonna be more, right? So
yeah, I'm super excited to see pre-releases. Like, that's something that I'm shocked that it took us 7 sets, honestly, to get to pre-releases. Like, it makes too much sense. It supports the stores because they sell the product. It brings in more casual people because it's a casual format, and it's just a ton of fun. So like, yeah, super happy to see pre-releases in now.
For sure, yeah. And what, like you mentioned there about supporting the local game stores, like they even have the like buy a box promos now, which is like huge. I didn't think they were starting that until Reign of Jafar, but they're actually going to be starting that in Set 7. So if you go to your local game store, I think it's for each, obviously subject to the local game store themselves, but like for each box you purchase, you'll get one of the Emerald Amethyst Kronks, like a promo card, which is pretty cool. Like, I firmly believe in, you know, supporting local game stores at the core, because that's where you go to play every week, right? So
yeah, we need anything like that supports the local stores. Anything that brings people into the store instead of going to like Walmart or Target or something, like, because they're not growing the games, they don't know anything about the games. Like, but the card stores are creating these tournaments. It helps in the downtime of these big tournaments. Like, so we just need to support them.
For sure.
100%.
But getting into some of the new products, we have a new Illumineers quest. This is Palace Heist, so I'm gonna say it's probably gonna be similar to the Ursula's Return, which I actually had a lot of fun with. I don't know if I ever beat that on hard mode, but I remember it was just before DLC Birmingham. I was like running a retailer day for Ravensburger just the day before, and I was like, you know, demoing this to some retailers. I was like there for like an hour and a half with these two people who were like grinding it out against Ursula. But it was so cool because I got to basically play as Ursula, right? Like I was kind of like the villain. So it was really, really cool. Yeah. And I think, you know, for the certain type of players who love this, I think this is great for casual players. I think it's great for players who maybe are more fan of kind of board games. If you like co-op gameplay, you know, instead of actually playing against your partner the whole time, right? Like you can play with them and try to defeat your fire. So yeah, I've had a lot of fun with this product in the past, and I think this one's going to hit really well as well.
Yeah, I think these things are huge. It brings in a whole different type of player to the game, whole different people. And yeah, you play with spouses, you get them into the game. Like, it just facilitates growth into the game, and it's so much fun. For sure, yeah.
Next up, we have the Trove. So just kind of checking out some of the art for this set. We've got obviously Jafar himself. We have like I want to say what looks like a Minnie Mouse Knight, maybe, but like, you know, she's got that shield, that amber shield, and then this Rapunzel. Man, Kim's gonna go crazy when she sees this. I think Kim's sleeping right now, but like this Rapunzel looks absolutely dope. But yeah, it's also interesting because obviously we can see, like I said, the amber kind of shield and stuff. I'm gonna guess that we're not gonna see like, you know, Duel Links as a theme for like this set as well, or like, you know, for sets moving forward. Who knows? Maybe we will. But it'll be interesting to see. I definitely think that it's gonna be more so kind of illusions, or I'd like to see maybe some type of new mechanic for like action cards or something like that. I don't know, song cards. Like there's a lot of cool design space you can still explore. So yeah, curious to see what they're gonna do. But the art, of course, is just phenomenal. Next up, yeah, we've got the starter deck. So we've got an Amber Amethyst starter deck and a Ruby Steel starter deck. Again, just kind of showcasing the art. We've got Tiana from Princess and the Frog. We've got, I think that's Bruno from Encanto in the Amethyst there. And then we've got Stitch and Mulan in Ruby Steel. Ruby Steel, yeah, that's actually just another ink combination. I know a lot of people have been trying. Moyen mentioned to me, he was like trying to like break that deck or like test that deck so much just before the Battle Bear tournament, because he was like, oh, I want to just like really see if there's anything that's been missed within this meta. And he's like, oh, I tried some cool stuff, but he's like, no, I'll just play the deck I know that does well, which is completely true, you know. So
right,
yeah. And then we have, you know, again, just looking at the kind of booster packs, the packs, all that type of stuff. So yeah, the playmats as well. We've got the legendary Hades. We've got the Chip and Dale action card. The legendary Hades playmat. Honestly, I always look at the sets and I'm like, okay, will I pick up a playmat this set? As a fan of Emerald, I think I would probably pick up this playmat. It's like super dope. To see the full art of this as well is like really, really, really nice. So I'll definitely be keeping my eye out for that.
Anything Hercules sells me, so.
Hell yeah. Yeah, and then we've got the card sleeves, which is the set 1 Mickey Mouse and set 1 Tinkerbell Enchanted. And that's also the card sleeves as well. So yeah, for any of you who are interested in kind of just seeing the new products, that's a bit of insight into it. So, yeah, Zach, we're going to talk about a few things. Talk about yourself. So, the first thing I'm curious on is how you go about testing. This is a question we get so much on the podcast, right? You know, having either a testing group or going to even just locals to do testing on Tabletop Simulator, stuff like that. I remember there's one thing, I don't know if you mentioned it to me in Bologna, but I don't know how many people know this about you, but it's the whole idea of like testing with yourself. And like, you know, obviously, ever since you told me about this, I've very much been doing, you know, obviously doing my opening hands and doing mulligans and kind of getting that strategy going. But are you the type of person who like you'll have two decks and you'll kind of just play them out and see the lines and see how different openers kind of interact with each other. Because that is super interesting to me, because when I've tried to do that in the past, it's been really insightful. But at the same time, you're playing with all the information, right? Like you can't not really play with an open hand in that kind of form of testing, right? So how has that been for you? And like, I'm curious, was that something you started to do within Lorcana, or have you always done that within card games?
No, so I've always done that within card games, and it kind of stemmed from being a kid before like all the digital clients and stuff. Like if you wanted to play, like that was your option.
Sure, yeah.
If you weren't at a friend's house or whatever. So yeah, I'm kind of weird in my testing in that most of my testing for Lorcana has been me sitting down with both decks. There's definitely flaws with it, no doubt about that. But yeah, like literally that's been probably 90% of my testing for Lorcana events this year. So it's not something that I necessarily recommend to everybody, but it's worked out for me. That's just kind of what I do personally.
Yeah, no, I think that's sick. I think it's really impressive as well, because like I'm similar in a sense that, you know, I would love to test a lot more, but like you said, like you need other people to test, and depending on many situations, if you work a lot, if you live far away from an LGS or all these types of stuff. Like I test a lot on TTS because it's been really, really good to be able to like play with different people around the world, especially Moyne and Brendan. But yeah, like I remember ever since you told me, I kind of tried it myself, and I was like, this is quite interesting. And the more you do it, the more kind of openers and more kind of lines you see yourself. So yeah, like what I'll say is don't knock it till you'll try it, but I'll also say yes, it's probably not the preferred way that most people would test, right?
So, I mean, I think the main reason that I do it is because I can control all the variables. Like I can jump in and test 10 games straight of the same matchup, whereas I might go online and maybe see it once in 10 games, maybe not see it at all. Like so I can control that variable. I can control the exact deck list I play against. I can set up specific lines and rewind turns and see how it plays out different ways. And I, like you said, the opening hand, but like I think you can play without that bias and just make the most optimal decisions. So yeah, it's weird, but it works for me.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, for sure. Another question I had for you was throughout kind of your DLC career, like I think it's been really impressive how experimental, I guess, you've been with just like testing many different types of decks, because I remember watching you play one of my favorite decks now, which was Amber Emerald in a DLC, before many people were playing this deck, right?
Right.
And I was like, man, this is like, it's just super, super, super cool to see someone really put in the testing. It's really brave to bring a deck like that. Obviously, if you put in the testing and you think it's going to do well, it's like a really good meta call. But like, because we always get this question on the podcast, you know, how much do you test a deck until you think, oh, like it's not working or something kind of hasn't been found, versus, I guess, like trying to break the meta versus trying to tweak the meta, if that makes sense. It's a really complex question for sure, but maybe just use that as an example of when you brought Amber Emerald, right? Because it wasn't very well known at the time, and within that meta, did you think that was a really good bring for the field that you anticipated?
Yeah, I thought it was the best deck for that meta, essentially, because it was really good against Stillsong, really good against Red Purple when they didn't play it perfectly, and no one knew how to play it. Auto beat Blue Steel, like, yeah, it had really great matchups, and it was like 50-50 into the Bucky deck. Whoever went first was probably going to win. So yeah, I just thought it was a good call at that point.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then like, yeah, because it's so funny, because like I've always, Brendan's spoken about this as well, and you know, people are always like, how do I go about building a deck? Do I just try and get this fresh deck idea? Do I brew something? Or, you know, myself and Brendan have referred to ourselves as deck tweakers a lot of the time, right? Like we'll look at a deck and say, wow, this is like really cool, really innovative, but I always want to try and tweak things and try add my own little bits of spice. That's what I did when I kind of got my hands on Amber Emerald, and I tried loads of different things. I tried adding a 1 or 2 of this, and I was like, okay, do I want the whole You Forgot Me package? Do you want to try some daisies? And then that's what led me to bring that deck to Toronto, which, in my opinion as well, I think that was the best deck for that format, because like you said, right, we just got rid of our most favorite, our kind of an unfavored matchup, which was Bucky, right? 50-50. So the red purple matchup I knew how to do perfectly. Even like you said, even the red blue matchup, I feel even now, against a top tier red blue player that knows exactly how to play the matchup, it's pretty unfavored for me. But as soon as you play against somebody that's not familiar with Amber Emerald, like you can punish them so hard. So it kind of has that cool surprise factor to the deck as well. But yeah, I just think it's cool how you can bring decks like that and be kind of innovative and make this meta call, and kind of it shows as well. Like you, I can't remember, was that Dallas you brought that deck too, right?
Yeah, that was Dallas.
Yeah, you made it to day 2, right? I think you made day 2, and then did you get knocked out in the first round, second round?
Yeah, I lost in game 3 to the Bucky.
Bucky deck, yeah. Okay, I think I remember watching that deck. Yeah, you got Buckied. Yeah. But it just shows, right? Like you can put in the work and kind of put up a great performance. But yeah, I mean, you've been performing so consistently. Like I think it's fair to say you're one of the most consistent Lorcana players across the board for all of the DLC performances, all of the like tournaments, even before the DLCs and stuff like that. Like you were always like up there. So like when I saw you, you know, obviously qual, and you had your interview for the NA Champs, bro, I was nearly crying with you. It was the emotions, honestly, because like it just really shows how much you care about this game, how much work you put into it, and it's like it's people like you that I really like. Obviously, you're my friend and you're a great player and stuff, and it would be awesome for you to win Worlds, right? And I'm kind of meaning, you know, future world champ, and I really do think you've got a great shot. But having someone like you kind of represent this game as a whole is absolutely incredible. Like the biggest thing that I always want to do for the podcast is help players aspire to be better players, and they look at players like Moyen, at yourself, at Zan, and they want to try and be that little bit more competitive, or find whatever enjoyment they can find out of the game, right? You know what I mean? Like you're such a positive person within this community, and I think it's people like you that we need to have representing the community for sure. So yeah, like man, I truly wish you all the best at Worlds and stuff like that. I think you're gonna crush it regardless. You're such a grinder, like, you know, no matter what. And yeah, just know that like a lot of the community's with you as well. Like we all got your back, bro, for sure.
I definitely appreciate the kind words. Definitely means a lot.
Yeah. So yeah, actually, do you want to speak a little bit about your that kind of balance I was talking about as well, right? Like kind of the balance between like physical health and mental health and preparing for tournaments and for events, right? Like we've done an episode on the podcast before, like, you know, covering fundamentals for tournaments, which it sounds silly, but it's like you still need the essentials. Like you need to bring food with you, need to bring water. Like you can't kind of go a whole day or your mind is just going to burn out. But all of the prep you do for, you know, testing for a certain meta and stuff like that, that's not all you do, right? Like I know physical health is something that's really important to you, and it's a fine balance, right? Do you want to speak about how you feel that helps you as a card game player, if possible?
Sure. Yeah, I've mentioned it several times before. Like I really think that you need to go beyond the cards and care about everything, and physical health is one of those things. It's not as big a deal in Lorcana as other games because Lorcana only has 9 rounds, which only 9 rounds. Some people might think that's a lot, but yeah, it only has 9 rounds where we should have a lot more. But yeah, your play will decline over the day, and if you're in better shape mentally and physically, if you eat well, your play will not decline as much, and you'll be much better. So I think it gives me a huge edge, taking every single aspect serious, and why I can be consistent across every single tournament, basically. So like I've said in the past, I go to the gym, I run a ton, and I eat well, especially at tournaments, so that I can perform at my best. I know a lot of people like to like fast during tournaments or only like one thing or something, and I completely disagree with that. I think you obviously don't overeat, but I think you should be nourished throughout the whole day. So I eat protein bars and all kinds of snacks throughout the day, tons of water, Gatorade, all that stuff. It sounds like I'm talking about like an elite athlete, an elite sport or something, but literally I think that those things do matter in Lorcana, even when people don't see the connection.
Yeah, no, 100% I agree. I also know a lot of people that are like, bro, like I won't eat anything for the tournament and I'll play like insane. I'm like, it doesn't work like that, bro. Yeah.
They think it gives them the hunger to be better at the game, and like I see what you're saying, but like I just completely disagree. I don't think that's right. Yeah.
And also like rest as well before an event is so important. I know.
Massive.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that, of course, like, you know, you're out at an event, you're taking time off work, like you want to have fun with your friends and hang out and stuff. But like Moyen is one of these people, right? Like I know if Moyen's qualified for like a day 2 somewhere, he's like, I'm getting food I'm going home, and I'm
Good,
chilling
yeah,
out. And
that makes sense.
there's also the balance between. I remember this was kind of a bit of an issue. Like we were at EU Champs, and day one was finished, and they were talking about, obviously they would get the deck lists. It's going to be open deck lists in day two. But Frank Carson was there, and obviously coming from Magic and stuff like that, he was like, okay, yeah, like do the players get the deck lists now? Can they go home? Can they like look over the decks? Can they prep? And like when I spoke to some people about it, just getting people's different opinions about it, it was like it would be nice for people to have the lists, and then you can check your melee stuff, and you can kind of say, okay, my opponent's running this. But then some people say, oh, maybe it's like a bad thing because maybe people will over fixate and like not get enough sleep the night before and trying to like test their matchups and play a lot. I think ultimately we came to the conclusion that it would probably still be fine if the deck lists were given out the night before, because that's the player's choice if they want to test vigorously or if they want to get enough sleep. I think having as much information as possible at that stage is probably fair. And Frank made some valid points about it as well. But just a general thing of like, it's still interesting to think of, it's players like Moyne, like there is still a choice that's involved. Like he would probably, if he had the choice to see his list, like, okay, he'd probably eat food, go home, look at the list, maybe do one or two things of testing or try do some general stuff. And I know he just sleep because he's like, there's no point of like vigorously testing this, because then there is such a thing as like over practicing or over stressing at that time, and that could really cost you the next day, right? So it is interesting.
Yeah. At that point, I would rather the list be public, because if you don't give out the list, then people are advantaged. Like if you, like say I went on stream in round 7 or whatever, everybody knows what I'm playing, whereas I might not know what my opponent's playing. So at that point, I think you should go ahead and give out the deck list as soon as possible.
100%. Yeah, I think remembering back, that was like the key argument, I think, of like, some players have been, and that was the whole thing of, I remember a lot of people talking about just like EU champs and NA champs of, the closed versus open deck lists. And then people, I think I made a joke on stream leading up to it about like, Moyen, what if they like, what if they ask you to be on stream and you refuse and they like DQ you? And I was like, we were like, they'll never do that. I'm like, then afterwards they're like, yo, bro, they'll do it. Like, if you don't want to play on stream, you're getting DQ'd. And I was like, oh my God. Yeah. So, it's interesting. And listen, again, we've talked about the whole culmination of the previous like DLCs and leading up to EU champs and NA champs, and I think Ravensburger are definitely looking at all of this and evaluating it for the next season. Like I can guarantee every single aspect of these tournaments is being reevaluated and looked at, and they're looking at other games like Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, to see how kind of they structure things. And I think things are just going to get like bigger and better. A part of it was like it was such a shame to me that even what happened in DLC Melbourne, there was like kind of a bit of a poor ending to an otherwise very successful like first year of competitive play, probably overwhelmingly successful. How fast these events sold out, how well they've been run for the most part, at least, right? Like, for a first year of competitive play, you can't expect everything to be pristine. But I remember a lot of people talking about, the DLC in Atlanta, and, it wasn't too well organized in certain areas. But then when you got to like NA Champs or even Seattle, it was like, man, this is like night and day. They've like crunched down and really improved these. So, I think things are just going to get better overall. And I'm excited. Everyone's saying, world's news when. There's no man that wants to know more about this than this man right here, let me tell you.
Please tell me, yeah.
Yeah, so fingers crossed we get some news soon. And of course, like new season of DLCs, I'll be all over that for sure. I can't wait. Ravensburger, please get me in the booth this year, thank you. I'm looking forward to it. I think we're gonna move on to some set 7 decks, discuss some kind of brews that people are cooking up. If that's okay with you, Zach. Yeah.
Sure, let's do it.
We'll start with Purple Steel, if that's good with you. So Purple Steel. Do you want to just talk about this deck in general for yourself, Zach, before we kind of move into set 7? Your thoughts on maybe why you brought this to NA Champs. Obviously, it's a deck that you tested a lot with, and how you felt that deck was going to perform, kind of maybe just going into the NA Champs in general.
Yeah, I was super happy with it going into NHMs. With my build specifically, I did a lot of stuff that people hadn't done. Like everyone was playing 4 Genie, and like that was what they were leaning on. Everyone had started playing Strength at that point, but not everyone was playing a lot of Zeus or any Zeus. And I went up to 4 Zeus. I just kind of felt like I figured out how I could beat the Ruby Sapphire that I knew would be everywhere. And the 4 Zeus was just massive for zapping sharks all day. I had all the cantrips, so I had tons of draw power. Yeah, I felt like it was the perfect deck. It was the best deck on the draw. And in 2-game format to make day 2, you have to be winning on the draw a lot. So having the best deck on the draw, I felt like gave me a huge advantage because you have Calhoun and Strength and lots of different things there. So yeah, I felt like it was the perfect deck leading into NA Champs.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, speaking about it being a good deck on the draw, yeah, I think Calhoun is like one of the best cards when you're on the draw. They can really kind of claw you back into the game. But yeah, taking a look at this Purple Steel deck list, this is from Attack for 2. And this is like kind of, I would say, like a standard Purple Steel. The biggest inclusion, obviously, the one new card in there is the Giant Cobra. And this is definitely going to sound silly to some of our viewers, but I was testing a Purple Steel deck this weekend against multiple different decks. I only found out this weekend that this card has May in it, so you don't have to discard a card. You can play this as just a 3-cost 4/4, which changed the card completely for me. It really, really did. So for in that case, I think the card is like quite good. Against certain type of decks that don't have as many actions that can kind of target this. The main deck I think I played against in my testing was the blue steel deck, like Hard and Sweet's kind of low to the ground. You play Popsicle, you play Bell on turn 1. So the Cobra and that was quite interesting because obviously there's strengths and there's Storm Rage Jones, but that's kind of it. So playing the Cobra in some sense was quite good because suddenly you can take out an Alice. You basically take out all of their 3/3s, which is like really, really important. And I think like 3 strength has been such an important statistic, like in general across Lorcana, especially of like, okay, can this trade back into it and stuff. And it's been really, really interesting. But I think my biggest change that I made to Purple Steel in my testing for set 7 was I actually took the genies out. So it's like super, super, super low to the ground now. I'm curious on just like your thoughts in general on Genie now. Do you think Genie will kind of stay in Purple Steel lists moving forward because it's like, pretty hard to interact with for the most part, depending on the deck you're against? Or do you think that it will kind of evolve to be like maybe even lower to the ground, right? Because we also have that new set 7 card that's like a 2-drop that gains lore when it enters play. I personally am not the biggest fan of it because you've already got such good I think I'd rather play a 2-drop like Mr. Smee that's just a 3/3 quest for 2 than play a 2-drop that just kind of gains lore. But yeah, curious to hear your thoughts overall on maybe this deck list in particular, and then about like the genies and some of the new cards you could add.
It's funny you say that about Cobra, not knowing that it was a May. Like, card game players have a history of not even reading the cards.
Oh, yeah.
I do the same thing.
Yeah.
I literally lost top 4 of a set championship I was playing green purple with the big Ursula. I didn't realize it had a second effect because I never actually read the card. I thought it just blocked them from singing songs. I could have exerted their character and won and moved on to finals.
No!
I didn't even, because I literally didn't even read the card. I don't know why. I don't know why we do that, but yeah.
We do that, yeah. We have a tendency to do that. Yeah.
But yeah, speaking on Genie specifically, I mean, you saw it in my NHM deck. And specifically, if you look at that top 8, the 2 players in that tournament that said Genie's not as good as you think it is, me and Ed, we both made top 8. So I think Genie was already on his way out a little bit. It's still an amazing card. Obviously, it's fantastic. But I'm not a huge fan of it because it costs 4, and then when they kill it, you get punished so hard. Like, it's such a big tempo loss. So I'm definitely going to be building without the 4 full count of Genie myself for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be the trend because of Sapphire in general. Like, Sapphire kills Genie pretty easily. Well, Ruby Sapphire and then like Zeus and stuff in Sapphire still. So yeah, I think Genie probably won't be a 4-of, but who knows? Yeah, I think Cobra pushes you towards this kind of dock build more than it did the Rabbit, which makes me a little sad. Because Rabbit, you want to build up a big hand, and Dock, you want to just empty out your hand. So obviously it pairs better with Dock. So it makes sense that they're starting there. What does scare me about this is that you don't have ways of dealing with Shark very easily.
Yeah, no Zeus, right?
So, yeah, that's my biggest concern with these Dock kind of builds. Like, how do you beat the Shark consistently? But otherwise, I think that it looks very good. Yeah.
As I was gonna say, it is interesting because in regards to being able to take out a Shark, like Zeus is so important. I remember like playing Purple Steel back in Lille. It was the first deck I brought to DLC, and it was very much more of a mid-range deck. I'll be honest, like looking back on it now, it was a cool deck, but it was probably just like a worse Steel Song deck at the time. But one of my favorite things to do with the deck was, you know, when you're on the play, like you play a rabbit and then you sing a Zeus. So I was like, oh, this feels so good to do, right? It's like your 2/3 sings a Zeus, and if they kill it, you don't even care because you get a card back. So, yeah, I would be curious. Like, yeah, that's probably the biggest thing to keep in mind about Purple Steel is like, do you have a way to deal with the shark? Maybe we even see some inclusions of like the Steel John Silver, right? That stops something from attacking. Yeah. It's probably not what you want in this deck specifically, but it is another way to specifically kind of disrupt shark. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention about Genie was like, as you said, yeah, like it's pretty weak to like Sapphire, Ruby Sapphire, and you know, Ruby Amethyst. I honestly think that Genie's pretty weak to Emerald, because if they have a Muses out, this feels so bad. It's exactly like I remember when we had Lorcana Decklist on the podcast, and he was speaking about his Emerald Amethyst deck, right? He said he had like a 1 or 2 of Mother Knows Best in the deck. And he's like, yeah, they play a shark, I'll just Mother Knows Best it. They've basically done nothing. I'm like, that's so true, right? And it's the same way, like, it's the same way. If I have a Muses on board, you play Genie, I'll just bounce the Genie. You can play it again, sure, but I'll probably just keep bouncing it and keep playing songs and stuff. So it's another reason why, yeah, I kind of feel like Genie might be on the way out as well, but I also agree it is still a very, very strong card, and it's kind of meta dependent, I suppose.
Yeah, it's so good. It's just so punishing when they deal with it immediately. So
yeah, I agree. Yeah, moving on to the next deck that we're going to discuss. This is the Blue Steel deck from Harlan Sweet. So this might be a little bit of breaking news. I don't know. I literally messaged him a little before this saying like, oh, have you made any changes? Because previously, the last kind of major change that I know Harlan made to this was he basically said, he was on Twitter, he was like, okay, do we go like the full Doc package or do we go the full Hiram package? He's like, oh, maybe we just go both, right? So I think the last build he had like 4 Doc and had 4 Hiram. This version, we can see the 3 Hiram instead of the 4. Pluto's made its way back into the deck, because in my testing with this deck, I was like discussing how I felt like Alice was quite vulnerable. Like once she's exerted, she's pretty much always going to die to like a Fox or to anything else. And he was like, yeah, like that's why Pluto in the previous version of the deck helped out so much against that. And there's also 1-cost Simba here now instead of, I think it was previously the 1-cost Mickey with Resist. So Simba just being able to filter stuff a little bit easier as well. But this deck is still kind of the core of what the deck wants to do. Cogsworth is such a centerpiece to this deck. I feel like every time I've played against this deck, if they build up to the Cogsworth, if you're not specifically playing a deck with Ruby where you can kind of do a clean board wipe or whatever, and you're very board based, it's really, really tricky to deal with. But this is the standard stuff, and this is kind of what I think some of the Blue Steel decks are going to evolve with. Like, you know, it's one of the few decks that you can play 8 1-drop cantrip items that, you know, you can go turn 1 Bell, and then you can go turn 2 Sing something. So Bell's kind of just like a Cindy now. The Benjas in here so I actually want to pick your brain a little bit, Zach, on Benja as a card. Do you think Benja is... I personally think that Benja is probably the most efficient way to remove an item and also kind of establish tempo, because he's going to be questing for a little bit. But do you think against Sapphire specifically, obviously Benja coming down at the exact right moment maybe to get rid of a Sapphire coil or something is really, really good. But do you think we're in a meta where Benja can still be impactful enough to actually see it into, like, make its way into lists? Or do you think, like, item decks are just, they go so fast that Benja isn't really even worth anymore? It's a bit of a weird question, but you kind of get what I'm saying.
It's super tough to answer with the set being so new. We definitely saw Benja fall off in the past. Just having the 2 strength, he just dies so easily to everything. But I mean, coils coming in, obviously items are going to be everywhere, so Benja certainly gains value this set. So yeah, I think he's better than he was anyways. Sure. Really hard to tell.
Yeah, that makes sense. Early though. But yeah, this deck in general as well, like I do think it's super powerful. This is a deck that my fiance Kim, she basically just like took Harlan's deck, brought it to a set champs, and she won her first Scar promo with it, which was awesome. So the deck's like really, really powerful. I can't like, you know, express how much, like, how, again, this kind of innovation that Harlan brought. Like, he brought this deck to the EU champs, and I don't think anyone was really expecting to see a Blue Steel deck like this, right? So it's really cool when players can kind of do that and bring their creativity to an event. But yeah, looking forward to see how the deck develops and see how, you know, how it kind of iterates over time. The next deck is Emerald Sapphire, which is like kind of been the talk of the town for set 7. Maybe some people are like, oh, maybe this is the set that it really starts to shine. This build is from Humble. And I was saying to Zach before we started the podcast, I'm not like the biggest Emerald Sapphire like enthusiast or player, but I said if I were to build a general Emerald Sapphire deck, I think the one card I would like to include is probably Muses, because Emerald Sapphire is a deck that suffers with a lack of interaction cards. Like you can see in this deck right now, like the only real interaction card is Let It Go, which is not really the best disruption tool because you're kind of ramping them at the same time. But that's why I think Muses with an Emerald is one of the few cards that has proven to be quite good at kind of disrupting your opponent. So that's one card that I don't know if I'd say I'd start my Emerald Sapphire build around that specifically, but it's such an integral part of kind of this disruption plan that I like to have in these types of decks that I think I would probably build around that a bit. But this deck's also super interesting because I looked at this this Emerald Sapphire Yokai card, right? This Duel Link card, and I was like, it's interesting. I remember I looked through the whole card library and I was like, okay, any card that has Shift 4, this card that actually has some real potential. But then I just remember saying to Moyen, well, I don't know why I'm doing that, because you could just ramp on 2 and you're still going to shift the, you know what I mean? If it was a 1-drop, right? Like you play a 1-drop and then you ramp 2 and then you shift the 1-drop. But Yokai makes this Baymax like a little bit better, right? That has Shift 4, so like you can shift this Emerald Sapphire Baymax onto the Yokai itself. You still want to be doing ramp on 2, so it's cool to see this kind of interesting Floodborn version of Emerald Sapphire. I think, again, I know Spessie's a big fan of the Emerald Sapphires where you just kind of ramp to like a bend to my will. So like, you know, and especially if you're against something like a Ruby Sapphire player, you just get rid of their hand and then suddenly they're top decking. Like that's honestly probably the best thing that Emerald Sapphire can kind of do at the moment. But yeah, there's also got this Ink Geyser in the deck. This is such a weird card to evaluate for me personally. What are your thoughts on the card in general, Zach?
Oh, I think it has potential to be absolutely cracked. I don't know if it's there yet, but I mean, it's a scary card for the future. I'm really excited to try this color combination in this set. There's just so many potential with it. I think the problem with Muses is there's not any good songs. There's barely any good songs.
No, you're right. You're right. Yep.
That's the biggest problem. It definitely makes sense. Like you need that control, but yeah, it's kind of hard to use as well. I don't know how much I love the shift way of building this deck. I like the discard your hand version of it as well. Yeah. So I don't know if this one, I don't know. I had to try this for sure, but yeah, I'm excited to try out this combination.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point you made about like there's not great songs for Muses to combo with. Like you kind of want songs that replace themselves most of the time, so you're probably going to be playing like Heffalumps and Woozles and stuff just to get the card draw. That's actually the biggest challenge I've had with Amber Emerald. Even like this set, they were starting to reveal the Amber Emerald Duel Links. I was like, please give my deck some support. Give me one card. Give me one card. And I'm like, bro, it ain't it. I understand that as well to some extent. They probably don't want to support this like discard package too much more because it can be very, very oppressive. And I know it's like not fun for a lot of players to play against. But I was like, man, give me one card, please. But no, unfortunately not. The next deck we're going to look at is a Ruby Sapphire deck. I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Weevil. He was one of my testing partners I've been playing with over the past little while. And he built this Ruby Sapphire shell, which is very much kind of the standard control version. Some of the new cards in here include the 6-cost Tamatoa. We have 2 of the Sapphire coils, and that's kind of it. But it's interesting when you look at a deck like Ruby Sapphire, how even some of these small changes can kind of drastically change the deck. This is very much still a very control-heavy version. I think some of the most recent changes that were made was that the small Sisu count went up to 3 instead of 2, and I think the ice blocks went from 1 to 2 as well. I think we dropped down on a Vitalosphere. The Sapphire coil count's been interesting as well because you only ever really want 1 on the board, so I think 2 has been fine to test with for the moment. But the cool thing, well, I'm not a big player of Sapphire. Maybe the not so cool thing for somebody facing this deck is having the Sapphire coil in a deck like this opens up a very interesting opener rather than just going for the ramp. So if you're playing loads of different games, I think the ramp on 2 is still the thing you want to be doing majority of the time. But against certain decks, having the opportunity to play a coil on 2 and then play Sisu on 3, and then after that either ramping more or just playing just playing a How Far I'll Go or playing a Tal or whatever, isn't too bad against some decks that are like super low to the ground. So maybe, in the past, certain aggro decks have performed better into Ruby Sapphire that this Sapphire Coil opener can do really well against. For example, like I remember I was playing Green Steel against this list, and I played a 1-drop Diablo and a Morph, and then I was like, oh, I can shift Beast. But I think I was on the... Was I on the play? Yeah, I was on the play. And they dropped Sapphire Coil on turn 2, and I was like, man, if I shift my Beast, it's just dead to Sisu. I was like, this is crazy, right? It felt like absolutely nuts, but this is like another pretty strong opener that you can have against certain types of decks. Again, I think some people overhyped that, like, oh, you'll do this opener every time this card's absolutely busted. Like, when this card is on the board and it does what it does, yes, it is very, very powerful, but it's about when you want to slot it in. It's like, if it comes in the mid to late game and you happen to have the right cards to work with it, yeah, this card can be pretty impactful. But I think the count is interesting. I think 2 for the moment, like I said, has been interesting to test with at least. You only ever really want 1 on the board. But yeah, this deck has been super fun to test against, honestly, because it's Ruby Sapphire has been known to be like pretty much one of the best decks in the game for so many metas now, that being able to test against multiple different versions is super interesting. The one-off Scar inclusion within Ruby Sapphire is a personal favorite thing of mine, because your opponent never expects it when the one-off Scar kind of comes down. I think it's really, really cool. This 6-drop Tamatoa, from what I've experienced playing against it, has been... I don't think it's performed too well, but again, it's like, if you play it once, like, you get the advantage out of it. But again, it's a 6-drop inkable legendary card, so sure, if it's in your deck, you can just ink it. It doesn't matter. It's not like so suddenly the Ruby Sapphire decks have replaced like Tremaines and Medusas, which were 6-drop uninkable cards, with 6-drop inkable cards that, sure, they don't do the same thing, but they're still powerful cards, right?
Yeah, well, the Tamatoa, it's obviously good in here too. I think it's more of a blue steel card, obviously, because of the 8 cantrip. And I think you're the only person that would say that it's fun to test against Ruby Sapphire. I can't believe those words came out of your mouth.
Yeah, maybe it was fun because there were some new cards to test against. I like nearly exclusively play test against Ruby Sapphire just because it's like Kim's favorite colors to play. Yeah. So I play against it a lot, and like, I don't know. I think it's also like, because I play against it a lot, I can see a lot of the different things that can change from set to set with different like new card additions. But yeah, I think I want to pose a question to you.
Sure.
And again, this is a very, very difficult question to answer, but since we've seen kind of DKP's Ruby Sapphire list come into the meta, my opinion of it, again, I'm not nearly like as much of an experienced Ruby Sapphire player as many others, but I don't think that deck is going to see too many changes if it's continued to see play into set 7, because it seems like that deck list is so tight in everything that it wants to do. I personally haven't seen too many new cards that I think can easily slot into it, but like it is interesting to think about, you know, as the meta develops, if we'll still see the way we've seen kind of Amber Steel go, right, where there's like traditional Amber Steel and then this kind of diggy hole. Are we going to pretty much see like this kind of traditional Ruby Sapphire control and this variant of the DKP list kind of stay within the meta? Like, it's very, very difficult to tell, but they're 2 very drastically different decks is all I'll say. Like, I played Amber Emerald into both of them. I feel like I struggle so hard against this build because like Sisu is such a powerhouse when it comes down against my deck. But against DKP's list, man, Amber Emerald rules. It like, I like 2-0'd so many times against it because it's so action heavy, it's so song heavy. You discard their hand, they're top decking in a lot of situations, you know, especially because I think DKP had 3 Hirams in his list at one stage as well. So the card draw isn't kind of there as much. You've still got your Sail, you've still got your Vision of the Future and stuff, but I'm curious, have you played much against the DKP list at all?
I mean, yeah, I've tested a fair amount into it. I think both decks will absolutely coexist. The reason that his deck does exist is because it's good against this more traditional one. And then it would force this list into less traditional to try to combat his list. So I think they'll definitely both be existing. And like you said, I can't remember any cards that would even go into his deck. And it didn't need any cards. It was already amazing. So like, it didn't need to gain any cards. And I think that's like the main thing about that people are upset with getting Sapphire Coil, because yeah, we might be blowing it out of proportion. Maybe it's not that great, but Sapphire just didn't need to gain anything, period.
It's crazy, bro. Just
giving them a crumb is just like a slap in the face.
Yeah, they're getting this card that we can clearly see is like a pretty powerful card, but they're like, I don't even think I play this card. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, it's like, and like, I'm looking at some other inks, and I'm like, man, I wish I had a card as powerful as Sapphire Coil, right? You know? So Yeah, it's a bit crazy for sure. Yeah, and then the last deck I wanted to take a look at was Green Steel. This is by Ocean's Tempest. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier, except it doesn't have the morph package. It is testing the new Green Steel Pete. It has the Lucifer in there, which I still really, really, really liked Lucifer within Green Steel in the previous meta, set 6 meta, especially when everyone was running around with these like emerald amethyst decks that had like barely any actions, and you punish them so hard with a Lucifer that they're like just not expecting. But yeah, this deck is.
I always thought Lucifer was better than the Ana that people played. Like in Vegas, when I played Green Steel, I played 2 Lucifers. I had tested Ana and just thought it was not as high impact. The ceiling on Lucifer is much higher. So yeah, I think Lucifer's great. I thought it should have never came out of the deck.
For sure, yeah. I actually like to see Crickeys in this list as well, because in my first set champs I played for this set, unfortunately I think I ended up coming 9th, but the card that performed quite well was I put a 1-off Crickey in the deck just to kind of test it. I was like, man, this Crickey is like, people need to respect Crickey more. It is like a really, really, really good card, and it allows like your smaller cards to trade up so nicely. Honestly, this seems like a very, very solid build of Emerald Steel. Again, like I say that because it's not really changed too much from what the previous versions have been. I think the 3 Peats can help out in certain matchups for sure. I know Moyen was a fan of running like 1 or 2 Captain Hooks as just like more 1-drops within Green Steel, which I think is fine, honestly. And yeah, I'd probably run this deck. Like this is if you like Green Steel and you want to try out Green Steel for like set 7, I'd say try this deck out for sure.
Yeah, I'll definitely be testing Green Steel. The problem with the list like this, I think, is that it's not amazing into Ruby Sapphire.
Yes.
Which is the problem with everything, of course. But I think that you probably need to go more aggressive, like you had talked about earlier with Zanzas, with the Merfolks and stuff like that. I just feel like this kind of list right here will struggle into Ruby Sapphire, which not a good problem to have right now.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very, very valid point. And actually, there's something else I missed about this list, that it doesn't have the dock package in there anymore, which I think the dock package is also very, very good within Green Steel, like I mentioned, because you can do dock and then bounce dock with Muses, replay dock. That's been pretty nasty in some of my set champs games. It's like really, really, really powerful. So yeah, I think I ultimately agree with your last point there. Was while this build is cool and there's some cool things going for it, it's like I think if this deck can't beat Ruby Sapphire, then that's a problem. Because I think if the deck can beat Ruby Sapphire with the Merfolks and a little bit more aggression, it can probably beat other decks as well quite easily. So yeah. Definitely check out Zan's build and maybe try and adjust some things from there. Like you could try like maybe 1 or 2 Peats, but this is what we're saying, right? I think Peat's a fine card, but against Ruby Sapphire specifically, it's just kind of too slow. It's not really what you want, right? So yeah, it's interesting for sure. All right, yeah, so with that, we kind of come to the end of the episode. So Zach, thank you so much for coming on and having a chat with me. It was a pleasure as always. Yeah, really looking forward to, future announcements for more competitions and stuff like that. I want to come over to the US for more events, because I've said this before. The when I went to Toronto, obviously, which is Canada, but like that Toronto event was my favorite DLC out of all of them, and it was because of the vibe, the atmosphere, everything was super, super cool. Obviously, maybe it was like it's weird, but it was like a little bit smaller as well. So I feel like I like met a lot more people and like spoke to so many people as well, which is awesome. And yeah, I hope to make it over for more events. I hope to just see more events in general. Yeah, and I can't wait to watch you win Worlds. Yeah.
Hopefully, man. Appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. Yeah. Definitely a pleasure to be here.
100%, yeah. Sorry, I don't want to keep like piling on the pressure. I hope you understand that's not what I'm doing. I'm not trying to put more pressure on you, mate. Yeah. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed this week's episode of the podcast, be sure to leave us a review on your local podcast platform, be that Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that jazz. There's a video version of this available over on youtube.com/@PodcanaPodcast. Hit the subscribe while you're there. Twitter is Kawatech_CG. And Zach, if you want to shout out your Twitter account.
Sure. It's just @Zach Bivens 1.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in next week's episode.